Hey everybody, what's up? This is a response video to Dr. Metropolis's top 5 comic books. I am a avid comic book collector, comic book geek. I've been collecting since I was in the 2nd grade. I've got over 15,000 comic books. Up until about high school, I got one comic book a month in the mail. I always had a subscription, usually to some type of Spider-Man title. In high school, or maybe 7th or 8th grade, when I started working part-time jobs and making my own money, I started buying a lot more titles. And by the time I was in college and out of college and making some cash, I probably was buying 24, maybe 30 titles a month. In the late 90s, I stopped buying them almost altogether. Quality started really going down the toilet, I thought. The storylines were going down the toilet, and they got so blasted expensive. But instead, at the same time, my interest in comic book toys and action figures and things like that started. So now I collect toys more than anything. I buy the occasional comic book, but I'm more of a toy collector. But I'm still into comic books. But like I said, I have 15,000 comic books. So to ask me my top 5, I can't do it, dude. Sorry. So what I did, though, I made a list, and I've got 7 items on my list. Some of my top favorite comic book moments, stories, sagas, miniseries, whatever. So I got a lot to talk about. Here we go. Number 7. I'm starting with number 7. Kingdom Come. I know this was painted and illustrated by Alex Ross. I'm not even actually sure who wrote it. It's a DC title. I'm a Marvel guy, but I always like the kind of the iconography, if that's the word, of Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, some of those titles. And this story took place in the future, I believe, where everybody was like old. They were all kind of gray-haired. And it just showed what the Justice League and what these golden era superheroes were up to. I don't remember much of the storyline other than each panel was painted by Alex Ross, and it's the most beautiful, lush comic book art I've ever seen. To me, this is comic book art at its highest level ever. So check out Kingdom Come. Number 6 on my list is the Spider-Man Black Costume Saga. This guy right here. I remember being in about 6th or 7th grade. I was waiting for my monthly Spider-Man comic book to show up. It comes in this brown sleeve. Pull the sleeve open, and there this guy is. And you end up finding out in a 12-issue limited series called Secret Wars, you find out towards the end of this how he gets his costume. It blew me away, and at the time I loved it. It was a change. I grew up with Spider-Man. The costume was alive. It kind of just merged on him like we all see in the movie now, which was why I was so excited about the movie. But it also had like this compartment, this interdimensional compartment, kind of a belt thing that it was weird. But then I remember there's one issue, and they kind of touch on this in the movie, where he's flying around and they have a cutaway of his face underneath the mask, and you see that he's sleeping, and then that costume's controlling him completely. This led to Venom, which was a great Spider-Man villain. The Venom stuff went into Carnage, which I didn't really ever get into. That got a little off the path, I thought. But I love the Spider-Man black costume era. Number 5, The Age of Apocalypse. Back in 1995, all the X titles kind of ended. They had their last issue, and then the next issue took place. It was this crossover of what if Professor Xavier never existed or got killed or something when he was young. And it showed an alternate future where Apocalypse, this guy, ruled. And what it did is had each title kind of an alternate thing. So you had Wolverine had one arm missing, and he was even more of a vigilante. Excalibur, they were like the British team, I believe, and they were all more special secret agents. And you had the guy that Cable, in this series, he was called X-Man, and it was an alternate version of the Nathan Summers character, more in control of his powers, more of a young guy. Great series, and what I loved about it was it posed the question, which I talk about a lot on my site. What would happen, the ripple effect, and what the difference one person can make. And when I read that series, it was about a 2 or 3 month series of all these titles I've been reading and the alternate possibilities. It blew my mind, and it really changed how I look at my purpose in life and the ripple effect that I always talk about. So at number 5, the Age of Apocalypse. Number 4, I just wrote down the X-Men of the late 80s, early 90s. This was when I was in high school. I first started buying the X-Men. Apparently some stuff had happened. Professor X was gone. All the original X-Men were gone. It was kind of a new era for the X-Men. It had Dazzler, Longshot, Storm, Wolverine, Rogue, Psylocke, Colossus, and eventually Jubilee. It was actually a very female-heavy cast. It was just great. It was Mark Silvestri was the writer. Chris Claremont was back. And there were just some amazing stories back then. And like I said, that was when I was in high school. That's when I got into the X-Men, the whole X-Men family. So number 4, the X-Men of the 80s and 90s. Number 3, The Dark Knight Returns by Frank Miller. I didn't get into this series until it was a reprint back in 1989 when the whole Batman movie, the Tim Burton movie, all the hubbub about that started. This was a dark alternate future for Batman. It was very gritty. It was very graphically drawn. Something I'd never seen in a comic book. It was very unconventional in the way the frames were and the pacing and just Frank Miller's graphic style. And to this day, that's affected how I draw comic books. There would be titles where it was just a newscast, and they'd have just like 4 little talking heads, which is all this text. And it was incredibly laid out, incredible story, very dark and gritty. And I never read anything that adult before. You know, it was between college and high school for me. So number 3, The Dark Knight Returns. It still has lasting effects on me to this day. Number 2, I wrote down X Factor of the late 80s. I got into the X-Men, and eventually I read X Factor. And X Factor were the existing, or the original X-Men, and they decided at the time to dress up as people who hunted down mutants, and then once they hunted them, that was their public persona, they would train them. And it was an interesting way they brought Jean Grey back, which I loved. I didn't know the whole story. This got me back into the whole original X-Men thing. But one of the storylines was called The 4 Horsemen of Apocalypse. And then there was storyline was actually the fall of the mutants. And you had this guy, Apocalypse, raging all of his carnage all over the place. And he had war, pestilence. He had all these people that he turned into bad guys. And then his final guy, he took Warren, the angel, and amputated his wings. And I'll never forget that issue where he's laying there and his wings are bandaged up. Eventually he comes back as Death. This is a little bit later in incarnation of him. But that issue, written by Louise Simonson, drawn by Walt Simonson. Again, some of the most intense drawing I've ever seen. I wonder how this story would hold up now. I haven't looked back. But amazing, amazing stuff. Especially, I wish I knew what episode or issue that was. I want to say 15, but The Fall of the Mutants, the X Factor of the late 80s. And number 1, no surprise here, this guy, Spider-Man. It's not even a storyline, but it's the Todd McFarlane years. Todd McFarlane, he was an artist on Batman for a while, then he went to Hulk, he drew the Gray Hulk. Eventually he goes to Spider-Man, and once he got his feet wet, he gave Spider-Man, this character doesn't even really have it, these huge eyes, and he completely changed the way the panels were drawn. He would have the characters flying out of the squares. It completely revolutionized or changed how comic books were illustrated. He eventually, they gave him his own Spider-Man title that he wrote, inked, and drawn, and he was like, he did all 3. To me, that's what I want to do, draw all 3. Eventually, he was unhappy with getting the credit, whatever. He went over and created his own comic book company called Image Comics, where he created this guy, Spawn. I have a bunch of Spawn comic books, probably 100 or so. But what Spawn did was it created the Todd McFarlane toy line. And to this day, Todd McFarlane makes the most incredible toys ever. And he really changed, to me, what comic books could be. And again, he brought the toys to a whole new level of art. So, number 1, I'm picking Todd McFarlane. He's affected how I look at comic books as art. He affected my comic book style. I mean, to the point, I draw Spider-Man with big eyes because of him, and it's so influential in my life as an artist to this day. So that's my top 7, probably my top 15,000. Thanks for listening to me ramble, and talk to you later. Schnick, schnick.